that I think a lot of times there's a fundamental mismatch with where companies deploy their sales resources as it relates to deals and when their clients are most receptive to listening to that message or listening to those ideas in the shaping of the deal, right? And you could, if you think about it as the over time of the sales cycle, right? And you can think of client, maybe that's the x-axis, and you talk about the y-axis as being the client's receptiveness to your ideas, right? Early on, when you're identifying a potential opportunity or qualifying the opportunity, and the client's even trying to come to grips with what he or she, may need to do, clients are very receptive to listening to ideas and points of view at that time, right? And they use that to shape what would be a tender, right? An RFP, an RFI, or what have you. But once that tender hits the street, their receptiveness drops way down, and it stays down until the point that they make a decision. And once they've made a decision, because think of all of us have been in this situation. You come in and you don't like the way the RFP is written, so you start trying to put something else in there, and maybe the client will say, well, that's fine. Give me a compliant bid, and you can give me a non-compliant bid as an alternative. But you got to work to even get to that point a lot of times, right?
Yeah, because usually when they say send the alternative to, their eyes roll, right?
Yeah, exactly, right.
Because they don't know how to measure it.
Right, because and they're trying to. There's an element of fairness that all human beings want to apply to a process like that, right? That they look at it and they start to have a little bit of angst about, well, how's that going to relate to the other bids, blah blah blah. You're right. You can almost watch their head go, right? And so then they make the decision, and then that receptiveness goes up again because now there's mutual success or mutual failure on the table, and they're more than happy to listen at ideas and how you can make it work. But now you as the provider are in a really tough spot because you either have to decide I'm going to eat that additional cost in the spirit of the relationship and what I could see later on, or now you're already in a game of possibly having to play change orders and you're barely mobilizing the project team, right? So if you think about that high receptiveness to low receptiveness back up to high, here's where I see the biggest problem. More often than not, the sales organizations I've been a part of don't put enough of their resources in that early stage work where they can truly shape the idea. And what I said earlier, write the RFP versus buy the RFP. That upfront shaping is where you write the RFP. And, very few companies do that well. And so I think it's critical to be self-aware about where your resources are positioned over that sales cycle. And you try to maximize that early stage interaction and communication in order to help get in a position where you have much higher probability of success.
Yeah. And I would say there's even a mismatch too, in that early on, there's not enough effort, enough resources, the right resources being applied to shape that RFP, to write the RFP. But then when it comes to the actual RFP is pushed out to the market and teams are putting their proposals together, suddenly there's a team of people from the company, your company, that get thrown in, and they haven't worked together before. But you've got the marketing folks, maybe you have a tender team that's supporting, you've got all the technical experts that are brought in to help respond to the RFP, and there's a massive influx suddenly of resources.
Yeah.
But at that point, to the point you made, the problem is the RFP is already set.
Yeah.
Right. And so now you're just responding to it. And let's be even scarier here and say, if you didn't write the RFP, who did?
Yes.
Right. And if it's your competitor, now you're having to respond to your competitor's strengths and your relative weaknesses. And, that takes even more horsepower to try to come up with, clues you together, oh my God, some sort of way to compete with Accenture or whoever you happen to be competing with, right?
Right.
And then when it comes time for solutioning, then the resources go up even higher because now you've got to bring in the people that are actually going to do the work and the delivery. Right. So yeah, it's a mismatch where, if slightly more or significantly more effort at the front end can set you up for so much more success later.
Absolutely. And as you were talking about that, I was laughing, thinking about, we've all been on them. right? The vendor Q&A sessions about an RFP, right? I mean, you could probably give this to a comedian who likes to do, comedy about the business world, and they could probably do a 20-minute riff on this, because we've all sat in those meetings, right? And nobody wants to talk. The vendors don't want to talk because they're afraid. You can say, well, I can shape things in the Q&A. No, you can't, because nobody wants to talk in those sessions because they don't want to tip their hand to the rest of the competition, or inadvertently like wake a competitor up who goes, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that, right? So those sessions more often than not are like these games of linguistic chicken, where people don't even want to talk because they're afraid of, tipping their hand one way or another, right? So I'm laughing as you're talking about that, so you got to shape it early, because if you don't shape it early, you're not shaping it.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you how many proposals I've been a part of back when I was in business development, before I started doing this. But since then, just the angst that the teams go through. Do we even ask that? Yeah.
And, the other point you brought up that I think is interesting, I've been with some companies who are really good, some firms that are really good about setting up, I'm going to call them like solutions centers of excellence or solutioning centers of excellence, where they do have teams of people, cross-functional teams that are all part of that center. And the field actually competes for their time, attention, and resources on deals. So it's a forcing mechanism that the field has to rigorously qualify the opportunity, show they understand the client, show what they've done to influence the client, and then bring that forward so that solutioning center of excellence then drives the pursuit. And now you are talking about a team that's very well meshed, right? That they work together effectively, and they can turn those kind of, really compelling proposals out. But I'm telling you, Kevin, that's the exception. It's not the rule. What you described is the rule. And so now you've got like learning curve on top of learning curve, right? You got the learning curve of what the client's looking for on top of, the learning curve of, hey, how do we all work together effectively to get this out the door? And then that team may disband, and bits and pieces may work again together. But, all of these things are headwinds against the, potential success of the opportunity.
Well, yeah. So you got my head spinning as you were talking about that, because how many teams have you been on or have you worked with that they, in the field, they weren't able to qualify the deal well enough to get the center of excellence's resources, or their account just wasn't big enough.
Right.
And when you're the salesperson and your quota is depending on this account, but the account just doesn't stack up to the top 50 or the top 100 for the company, it's hard to get those resources.
But you have to find a way to do the right thing, right? Because that's how you're going to make your living.
So. That's right.